A laugh. That's all it was. A short, sharp, ugly laugh at 30,000 feet. But this wasn't a laugh between friends. It was a sound of pure mockery, aimed by a flight attendant at a passenger in a middle seat in economy. The passenger was a black woman, dressed in simple, comfortable clothes. The attendant saw someone who didn't belong. What she didn't see was the woman who held the fate of the entire airline in her hands. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's about what happens when prejudice and arrogance collide with billion-dollar consequences. And for one attendant, the karma that followed was as real and as devastating as the laugh she never should have let out. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar soup of stale pretzels, jet fuel, and human anxiety. It was 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the gate for Horizon Air Flight 212 to LAX was a chaotic theater of human drama. Horizon, once a proud domestic carrier, was now visibly struggling. Its branding faded, its staff's uniforms looking a season or two out of date. The airline was, in the polite terms of the Wall Street Journal, facing significant headwinds, which was financial code for circling the drain. In the snaking line for Group 4 boarding sat Dr. Evelyn Reed. To the casual observer, Evelyn was nothing special, and she had designed it that way. She was a tall, striking woman in her early 50s, but her attire was a deliberate study in anonymity. She wore a simple charcoal gray cashmere sweater, dark travel trousers, and a pair of discreetly worn Rothy's flats. Her only luggage was a well-loved dark brown leather satchel that looked like it had seen more boardrooms and airport floors than most people had seen hot dinners. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant twist, and she wore no makeup. She was reading a dense report on her phone, her brow furrowed slightly as she absorbed data on European bond yields. She was the living, breathing antithesis of the passengers now being called for pre-boarding. We now invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Diamond Medallion members, to board at this time. The voice belonged to the gate agent, a young woman named Tiffany Hayes. Tiffany was the exact opposite of Evelyn. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a perfect, immobile shell. Her red lipstick was a slash of defiance against her pale, powdered skin, and her smile directed at the first-class passengers was blinding. But as her eyes scanned the general boarding, plebeians in groups 3, 4, and 5, that smile curdled into a look of faint, weary disgust. Evelyn watched her. She had been watching Tiffany for 20 minutes. She saw how Tiffany had gushed over a man in a rumpled suit, calling him Mr. Henderson and assuring him his upgrade had cleared. She also saw how Tiffany had curtly dismissed an elderly couple who had asked a simple question about their connection, snapping, "All information is on the board." Next, Evelyn Reed was not just any passenger. She was the founder and CEO of Reed Capital Partners, a private equity firm so powerful it didn't just buy companies, it shifted entire markets. And Project Phoenix, the code name for her firm's potential acquisition and salvation of Horizon Air, was currently sitting in her inbox, awaiting her final signature. The $150 million Series C funding round was entirely dependent on her assessment. She wasn't just an investor, she was the investor. She always did this. Before any major investment in a consumer-facing brand, she experienced it as a normal customer. She flew coach, she ate the food, she used the app. She called it ground truthing. Her partners called it her billion-dollar quirk. Today, it would become something else entirely. "Group 4, you may now board," Tiffany called, her voice flat, all the earlier enthusiasm gone. Evelyn stood, blending into the shuffling crowd. When she reached the podium, she handed Tiffany her paper boarding pass. Tiffany took it, her eyes flicking from the pass to Evelyn's face and back again. She scanned it. Beep. 28B, Tiffany said, her voice managing to imbue the simple seat assignment with a universe of pity and disdain. "A middle seat, right this way." She gestured vaguely toward the jet bridge, her eyes already scanning for the next person, dismissing Evelyn as unimportant. Evelyn said nothing. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and walked down the long, carpeted ramp. The impassive mask she wore, the one that had earned her the nickname the Sphinx on Wall Street, was firmly in place. But behind her eyes, a ledger was being written. She found her seat, 28B, squeezed between a young, nervous-looking student with headphones already on, Samuel Chen, by the look of his UCLA-branded backpack, and a burly man in a golf shirt who had already claimed both armrests and was aggressively typing into his phone. "Excuse me," Evelyn said politely. The man grunted and turned his knees, not making eye contact. Evelyn slipped past him into the narrow, unyielding confines of the middle seat. The legroom was non-existent. The fabric felt thin and unclean. She buckled her seatbelt and pulled out her bound-hard copy of the Project Phoenix proposal. The man on the aisle, the golfer, glanced over. He saw the cover. Confidential Horizon Air Funding Proposal. He scoffed, a tiny, barely audible sound. He probably assumed she was a junior analyst, or maybe a paralegal, tasked with carrying coffee and binders for the real executives up in first class. Evelyn opened the document. She saw the numbers, the projected losses, the desperate need for capital. And then she heard the voice again. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you a pre-departure drink? Champagne? Orange juice?" It was Tiffany Hayes who had moved from the gate to the cabin crew. She was leaning conspiratorially into the first-class cabin, her voice a syrupy, flirtatious coo. A moment later, she walked back through the economy cabin to the galley, her face resetting to that familiar mask of bored indifference as she passed Evelyn's row. The aircraft door closed. The safety demonstration began. Evelyn Reed put her papers away and closed her eyes, letting the rumble of the engines build. It was going to be a very long, 5-hour flight. The flight lumbered into the sky, breaking through the gray New York overcast into a blinding, brilliant blue. For the first 2 hours, Evelyn worked. She ignored the cramped conditions, the businessman's elbow digging into her ribs, and the faint, unpleasant smell from the lavatory. She made notes in the margins of her proposal, her handwriting small, precise, and vicious. Service culture, deficit. Staff morale and economy non-existent. Clear class-based service disparity. Risk factor, high. The drink service began. Another flight attendant, an older woman with tired but kind eyes, pushed the cart. "Something to drink, ma'am," she asked Evelyn. "Just a water, please. No ice," Evelyn replied. "Of course." The attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, handed it to her with a small professional smile. She treated Evelyn exactly as she had treated the person in 27B and as she would treat the person in 29B. It was efficient, polite, and equitable. Evelyn made a small, positive note next to Sarah's name. An hour later, Tiffany Hayes made her appearance. She was collecting trash, her movements jerky and impatient. "Trash? Any trash? Trash?" she snapped, pushing the bag down the aisle, her face sour. When she reached Evelyn's row, the man on the aisle handed her his cup. Tiffany took it, and her eyes flickered to Evelyn. Evelyn was reviewing a complex spreadsheet on her laptop. Tiffany's gaze lingered for a second, a flicker of something, curiosity, annoyance. She saw the expensive, razor-thin laptop, the focused intensity of the woman, and it seemed to conflict with the 28B seat assignment. It was a data point her prejudiced mind couldn't compute. She sneered, just slightly, and moved on. The inciting incident, when it came, was banal. Evelyn needed to use the lavatory. "Excuse me," she said to the aisle man. He sighed, a great put-upon huff, and began the laborious process of gathering his phone and his magazine. He stood, blocking the aisle, to let her out. As Evelyn slid out, her leather satchel at her feet was nudged by the man's leg. It tipped over, spilling a few of its contents onto the filthy aisle carpet. It wasn't much. A silver Bentley car key fob, a heavy vintage gold Mont Blanc fountain pen, and a small worn crimson velvet pouch, the kind used for jewelry. "Oh, the aisle man grumbled as Evelyn knelt to retrieve her things. "Ma'am, you're blocking the aisle," a sharp voice cut through the cabin noise. It was Tiffany. She was standing there, hands on her hips, her face a mask of supreme irritation. "I'm aware," Evelyn said calmly, her voice tight. "I'm just gathering my things." She picked up the keys and the pen, but as she reached for the velvet pouch, the drawstring loosened. A ring tumbled out and glittered with obscene defiance on the industrial-grade carpet. It was not a subtle piece of jewelry. It was an antique, a colossal, cushion-cut sapphire, the color of the deep ocean, flanked by two substantial old mine-cut diamonds. It was an heirloom from her grandmother, a piece whose value wasn't just in its carats, but in its history. Its insured value was well over $1 million. The entire aisle seemed to go quiet. The man who had been grumbling stopped. Samuel Chen, the student, peered over. Tiffany Hayes's eyes locked onto the ring. Her brain, addled by stereotypes and low-level envy, performed a quick, malicious calculation. Simple clothes, black woman, economy middle seat, $1 million ring. The equation did not compute. Therefore, the ring must be the variable to be removed. Where? Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a low, accusatory hiss. Did you get that? Evelyn froze, her hand hovering over the ring. She looked up slowly. I beg your pardon? That ring. Tiffany's voice was louder now. Passengers were turning to look. People in this section don't just have rings like that. I saw Mrs. Henderson in 1A wearing one just like it when she boarded. Evelyn's blood went cold. This was no longer bad service. This was an accusation. This is my property, Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. I would advise you to lower your voice and step aside. Tiffany saw the defiance as an admission of guilt. This was her moment. She was going to be a hero. She was going to catch a thief. No, I don't think I will, Tiffany said, a smirk playing on her lips. You probably lifted it from her purse when she was in the lavatory. We've been warned about thieves like you targeting our first-class guests. Thieves like me, Evelyn repeated. The ambiguity was gone. The meaning was crystal clear. You heard me. Tiffany leaned in. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the galley. We're reporting this to the captain, and you'll be met by security at LAX. A few passengers gasped. Samuel Chen, the student, suddenly found his voice. Hey, that's not right. She's been sitting here the whole flight. She hasn't gone anywhere near first class. Tiffany shot him a venomous look. You stay out of this, kid, or you'll be an accessory. This was the moment the flight changed. Evelyn Reed stood up to her full height. In the cramped aisle, she was suddenly an imposing figure, radiating an aura of cold, condensed power that Tiffany had never encountered. You have made a very serious, very public, and very false accusation, Ms. Hayes, Evelyn said. Her voice didn't rise. It sliced. Tiffany, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt, but she was in too deep. To back down now would be to admit she was wrong. She had to double down. Oh, really? Tiffany said. And then she did it. She laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly cackle of disbelief. As if you could ever afford something like that. You in 28B? Don't make me laugh. She gestured to the ring still on the floor. Hand it over. It's evidence. No, Evelyn said. What did you say? I said no. You will not touch my property. You will not speak to me again, except to apologize. And you will return to the galley immediately. Enraged by this absolute calm defiance, Tiffany made her final, fatal error. She reached out, intending to grab Evelyn's arm or perhaps the ring itself. Evelyn moved faster than Tiffany could have anticipated. She didn't strike. She didn't shove. She simply blocked. She picked up her ring, placed it in its pouch, stood, and held Tiffany's gaze. Touch me, Evelyn whispered, and you will be adding assault to defamation and slander. Now, get your superior. Tiffany's face was a mottled, furious red. Fine. You want the lead attendant? You've got her. We'll see how smug you are when the captain has you put in restraints. She stormed off toward the front of the plane, leaving a stunned, silent cabin in her wake. Evelyn Reed calmly sat back down in 28B, ignoring the stares of everyone around her, and took a long, slow, steadying breath. The Sphinx was gone. The dragon had been awakened. The atmosphere in the economy cabin was thick with tension. Passengers were whispering, stealing glances at Evelyn, who sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face an unreadable mask of stone. The businessman on the aisle looked pale, suddenly realizing he was a supporting character in a drama he wanted no part of. Within a minute, 2 flight attendants appeared. One was Tiffany, looking smug and vindicated. The other was Sarah Jenkins, the older attendant, whose face was a canvas of professional concern and bewilderment. Ma'am, Sarah began, her voice calm and respectful. My colleague, Ms. Hayes, has informed me there is a situation. She claims you are in possession of property belonging to another passenger. Tiffany smirked from behind Sarah's shoulder. Tell her. Go on. Tell her where you really got that ring. Evelyn ignored Tiffany completely. She looked only at Sarah. Ms. Jenkins, my name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. I was returning to my seat when my bag was accidentally overturned. An heirloom, a ring belonging to my family, fell out. Your colleague, Ms. Hayes, saw the ring. Evelyn paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She then, in front of this entire cabin, accused me of being a thief. She stated, and I quote, that people in this section do not own such things, and that I must have stolen it from a first-class passenger. She then laughed at me when I told her it was mine. She has threatened to have me arrested upon landing. Sarah Jenkins' professional demeanor faltered. The blood drained from her face. She had been flying for 25 years. She knew company policy. She also knew a PR nightmare and a massive lawsuit when she saw one. She turned to Tiffany. Tiffany, Sarah's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Is this true? Did you accuse this passenger of theft publicly? Tiffany's smugness evaporated. Well, look at the ring. It's huge. And she's in coach. It's obvious. I was just protecting the other passengers. You did not see her take anything? Sarah interrupted, her words sharp as ice. No, but you have no proof? No one reported a theft? I was going to check with Mrs. Henderson, but nothing. Sarah's composure snapped. You cannot ever accuse a passenger of a crime based on what? A feeling? On where they're sitting? On what they look like? The implications of that last phrase hung in the air. Tiffany's prejudice, so blatant to Evelyn and the other passengers, was now being named by her own superior. You will go to the rear galley, Sarah commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. You will not speak to another passenger. You will not leave that galley until I come for you. Am I clear? Tiffany's face, which had been red with fury, was now pale with dawning horror. She saw her career, her travel benefits, her sense of superiority, all flashing before her eyes. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes filled with a sudden desperate hatred, as if this was all Evelyn's fault. She spun on her heel and stalked to the back of the plane, slamming the galley curtain shut. Sarah turned back to Evelyn, her entire body language shifting to one of profound apology. Dr. Reed, she said, her voice trembling slightly, on behalf of Horizon Air, there are no words. I cannot express how deeply I apologize for the unprofessional and discriminatory behavior you just experienced. It is not our standard. It is not acceptable. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins, Evelyn said, her voice still cold, but the sharpest edge gone. Your professionalism is noted. Can I get you anything? Sarah offered, wringing her hands. A meal from first class? A bottle of champagne to take with you? We can move you to an open seat up front, if you'd like. It was a test. Evelyn knew it. Would she take the bribe? The hush money champagne. No, thank you, Sarah, Evelyn said. I am fine in seat 28B. I will not be moved as a reward for being humiliated. What I will require is your full name and employee number, and the full name and employee number of Ms. Hayes. Sarah's face tightened, but she nodded. Of course, ma'am. She pulled a pen from her pocket and wrote the information on a cocktail napkin. Sarah Jenkins, NAR 4492. Tiffany Hayes, NAR 801. Thank you, Evelyn said, taking the napkin. That will be all. Sarah nodded, gave one last worried look at the cabin, and retreated. The show was over. The whispers, however, were not. Did you see her face? That attendant is so fired. I can't believe she, said that. I wonder who she is. Dr. Reed. Evelyn ignored it all. She pulled her laptop back onto her tray table. The man on the aisle was pressed against his window, trying to become invisible. Evelyn didn't care. She paid $29.99 for the painfully slow, spotty in-flight Wi-Fi, another data point she logged. She waited for the connection to stabilize, a process that took nearly 10 minutes. Finally, a blue light indicated she was online. She opened her email. 2. Richard Todd Strickland, horizonair.com. CC, legalreadcapital.com, M. Davis, readcapital.com. Subject, urgent, incident on flight HA212, Project Phoenix on hold. She began to type. Richard, I am currently a passenger on your 10:02 a.m. flight from JFK to LAX, sitting in seat 28B. I am, as you know, a proponent of ground truthing a potential investment. My experience today has given me all the truth I need. At 1:52 p.m. Eastern Time, I was publicly accused of theft by one of your flight attendants, Ms. Tiffany Hayes. The accusation was based entirely on her stated belief that a black woman in an economy seat could not possibly be in legitimate possession of a valuable piece of jewelry. She proceeded to laugh at me and threaten me with arrest. This was not bad service. This was overt, aggressive discrimination in public defamation. As of this moment, Project Phoenix and the $150 million Series C funding round from Reed Capital Partners are on indefinite hold. I expect to be met upon arrival at LAX, not by your standard VIP service, by you. I will also require your head of in-flight operations, your chief legal officer, and your head of human resources to be in an emergency meeting at your LAX headquarters within 1 hour of my landing. The fate of your airline now depends entirely on your next actions. Regards, Dr. Evelyn Reed, CEO, Reed Capital Partners. She read the email once, her face grim. She looked at the name Tiffany Hayes on the napkin. Then she hit send. At 35,000 feet over the plains of Kansas, a $150 million deal had just been frozen by a single keystroke. And in the rear galley, Tiffany Hayes was chain-drinking Diet Cokes, complaining to another attendant about how these passengers were always trying to get freebies by pulling the race card. She had no idea what was coming. At the Horizon Air corporate headquarters near LAX, CEO Richard Strickland was in a glass-walled conference room, nervously tapping a pen against a Patek Philippe watch. He was a man who lived on a diet of stress and ambition, and today the stress was winning. The airline was hemorrhaging cash, bleeding $1.2 million a day. The only thing keeping the wolves from the door was the whispered promise of the Reed Capital Partners investment. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the Sphinx, was his white knight. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany table. He glanced at it, an email from Evelyn Reed. He smiled, assuming it was a pre-meeting pleasantry. He'd set up the full VIP treatment for her arrival at LAX in 2 days on her private jet. He read the subject line. The smile vanished. Project Phoenix on hold. He clicked it open. His eyes scanned the text. JFK to LAX. Seat 28B. Accused of theft. Ms. Tiffany Hayes. Black woman in an economy seat. Indefinite hold. Expect to be met by you. Richard Strickland's blood pressure spiked so high he felt dizzy. His face went from its usual healthy tan to a sickly mottled gray. No, he whispered, staring at the screen. She's on that flight? Now? In coach? He scrambled to his feet, knocking over his chair. His assistant, a young, competent man named Ben, flinched. Mr. Strickland, is everything okay? Get me the crew manifest for Flight 212 from Kennedy, now! Strickland roared, his voice cracking. Find out everything about a flight attendant named Tiffany Hayes. Get the head of in-flight ops, get legal, get HR, and get them to the LAX boardroom yesterday. Sir, The Reed deal is dead, Strickland yelled, clutching his chest. It's dead unless I can perform a miracle in the next 90 minutes. Get me a car. I'm going to the gate. Move. He was out the door, sprinting, his $3,000 Italian suit jacket flapping behind him. He was a man running from his own corporate execution. He wasn't just in trouble, he was extinct. Back on Flight 212, the descent into Los Angeles had begun. The mood was funereal. Sarah Jenkins had personally come to Evelyn's row to update her on the flight status, her face etched with worry. We'll be on the ground in 20 minutes, Dr. Reed. Again, I am so sorry, Evelyn just nodded. The landing is the least of your airline's worries, Miss Jenkins. But thank you. The plane touched down with a jolt. As it taxied to the gate, the fastened seatbelt sign dinged off. The usual chaos of passengers standing, grabbing bags, and jostling for position began. And then the lead attendant's voice came over the PA, but it was shaking. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unusual request this afternoon. We ask that all passengers, please remain in your seats. I repeat, please remain seated at this time. A groan of annoyance rippled through the plane. What now? The aisleman in Evelyn's row grumbled. We have been asked, the attendant's voice wavered, to allow Ms. Evelyn Reed in seat 28B to deplane first. Ms. Reed, will you please come to the front? Every head in the aircraft, first class, business, and economy, swiveled. Every eye locked onto the tall, calm black woman in the simple gray sweater now standing in the aisle of row 28. It was like a scene from a movie. The whispers were deafening. 28B? Who is she? Evelyn Reed. Wait, like Reed Capital? The aisleman whispered, his face ashen as he recognized the name from Forbes. Evelyn, ignoring the 200 pairs of eyes on her, calmly collected her leather satchel. She paused and looked at Samuel Chen, the student who was staring at her with wide, awestruck eyes. She pulled a slim, heavy card from her bag. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice clear in the silence. You were brave to speak up. The world needs people who aren't afraid to state the obvious truth. Good luck at UCLA. She handed him the card. If you find that studying structural engineering isn't for you and you're interested in finance, call my office. We're always looking for sharp minds with a strong moral compass. Samuel took the card. He read the embossed text. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Reed Capital Partners, Park Avenue, New York. He looked as if she had just handed him a bar of gold. Evelyn then walked down the long aisle. The first-class passengers, the ones Tiffany had fawned over, stared at her with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. At the front of the plane, by the cockpit door, stood Sarah Jenkins, and next to her, looking like a cornered, terrified animal, was Tiffany Hayes. She had been summoned from the rear galley to help open the door. Her face, which had been pale with anger, was now a ghostly chalk white with pure, unadulterated fear. She had heard the announcement. She had seen the way the first-class passengers were staring. She had just realized in that moment that she had not just insulted a passenger, she had insulted someone. Evelyn stopped directly in front of her. She looked Tiffany Hayes in the eye. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't list her crimes. She didn't say a word. She just looked. The weight of that silent, ice-cold gaze was more powerful than any speech. It was a look of profound disappointment, of judgment delivered, of a future being erased. Tiffany visibly trembled, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape. There was none. The jet bridge thumped against the fuselage. The door was unlocked and pulled open. Standing in the entryway, panting, his tie askew, was not a gate agent. It was Richard Strickland, CEO of Horizon Air. He was flanked by his terrified assistant, the head of in-flight operations, and two grim-faced LAX airport police officers. Strickland saw Evelyn. His face crumpled in a rictus of a forced smile. Dr. Reed, he gasped, pushing past the stunned flight attendants. Evelyn, welcome to Los Angeles. I got your email. I cannot begin to apologize. Evelyn held up a single hand, silencing him. Richard, she said, her voice echoing in the small space. We have a lot to discuss. She looked past him, at the two police officers. Officers. Then her gaze snapped back to Tiffany Hayes, who looked as if she might faint. Is this the woman? Evelyn asked the CEO, her voice like steel. Who you allowed to represent your brand? Tiffany let out a small, strangled squeak. Richard Strickland looked at Tiffany with a murderous expression. The reckoning had arrived. The passengers of Flight 212 deplaned into a scene of corporate chaos. They walked past the CEO of their airline, who was bowing and scraping to the woman from 28B. They saw the two police officers, and they saw the flight attendant, Tiffany Hayes, being spoken to by the head of in-flight operations, her face white and streaked with tears. Tiffany, the executive, a stern woman named Maria, was saying, You are immediately suspended pending investigation. Hand over your badge. You will be escorted to HR. Do not speak to anyone. But I thought... Tiffany stammered, her voice a pathetic whine. Hand. Over. Your badge. Tiffany, in a daze, unclipped her Horizon Air ID and handed it over. Her reign at 30,000 feet was over. Her life as she knew it was over. 20 minutes later, Evelyn Reed was seated in the main executive boardroom at Horizon Air's LAX headquarters. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. She was sipping a bottle of water. Across the vast, polished table sat Richard Strickland, his chief legal officer, his head of HR, and Maria, the head of in-flight operations. They all looked like they were attending a funeral. Theirs. Evelyn placed her leather satchel on the table. She began. "Let's start with the facts," she said, her voice calm and measured, as if she were discussing a quarterly report. Fact. My firm, Reed Capital Partners, is prepared to invest $150 million to save this airline. Fact. This investment is contingent on my approval. Fact. That approval is based not just on your balance sheets, which are frankly disastrous, but on the viability of your brand. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Strickland's. Your brand, Richard, is your people, and your people are a liability. Your employee, Ms. Hayes, did not just commit a microaggression. She did not just have a bad day. She engaged in what my legal team, and I've already spoken to them, by the way, the real firm, Skadden Arps, considers a textbook case of discriminatory harassment, defamation, and slander. The legal officer winced, physically flinching at the mention of Skadden. I am a black woman, Evelyn continued, her voice never rising. I am also, as Forbes enjoys reminding everyone, a self-made billionaire. I founded my company with $10,000 I saved from waitressing while I earned my PhD at the University of Chicago. I have been in rooms with presidents, with dictators, with Nobel laureates. And yet, on your airline in 2025, my worth was determined by the color of my skin and the class of my ticket. She let that hang in the air. Strickland opened his mouth, but Evelyn cut him off. I don't want to hear your apologies, Richard. An apology is a sentiment. I'm interested in actions. Firing Ms. Hayes is a given. That's not an action. That's sanitation. You're cleaning up a mess. I want to know how you're going to fix the culture that produced her. Strickland, humbled and terrified, finally spoke. Dr. Reed. Evelyn, what do you want? Name it. We'll do it. Mandatory retraining? A new diversity task force? Anything. Anything? Evelyn smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. Be careful what you offer, Richard. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the tarmac, at the Horizon airplanes landing and taking off. You're right. Firing Tiffany Hayes isn't enough. The deal is still on hold. The $150 million stays in my account. I am freezing Project Phoenix. Strickland's face crumpled. Evelyn, you can't. We'll be in Chapter 11 by Christmas. 5,000 jobs. Stop, Evelyn commanded. I am freezing the deal until a new set of conditions are met. Conditions that were not in the original term sheet. The room was stone silent. 1, Evelyn said, holding up a finger. You will hire at your expense, and I mean your expense, Richard, not the company's, a third-party independent auditor, a firm I select. They will conduct a full top-to-bottom audit of your company's D&I policies, hiring practices, and customer service protocols. This will not be a friendly HR review. It will be an autopsy, and it will cost you millions. Strickland swallowed but nodded. Done. 2, you will implement every single recommendation from that audit. No exceptions, no budgetary committees. You will fund it and you will implement it. This will include a mandatory, company-wide retraining for every employee, from the baggage handlers to the C-suite, especially the C-suite. Of course, the head of HR murmured. 3, Evelyn said, turning back to the room. Her eyes fell on Maria, the head of in-flight operations. I want the service record of the lead flight attendant on that flight. Miss Sarah Jenkins. Maria, surprised, fumbled with her tablet. Jenkins, yeah, here. 25-year veteran, flawless record, multiple commendations, 0 passenger complaints. She's been passed over for a management promotion 3 times. Why? Evelyn asked. Well, Maria said, she's legacy crew. Not as polished as the new image we're trying to project. Evelyn stared at her. The image you're projecting is Ms. Hayes. The competence you're overlooking is Ms. Jenkins. My third condition is this. You will promote Sarah Jenkins immediately, I don't care what to. Director of In-Flight Training, Vice President of Customer Experience. You will put her, a person who understands equity and professionalism, in charge of fixing the rot that Ms. Hayes represents, and you will give her a budget and the power to make real change. This was the twist Strickland hadn't seen coming. It wasn't just punishment. It was a complete restructuring of his leadership. And finally, Evelyn said, walking back to the table and picking up her satchel, the $150 million. The price just went up. Not in dollars, in shares. The original valuation is now void. My firm will be taking an additional 10% equity stake in Horizon Air for the same price. What? Strickland gasped. That's dilution. The board will do what you tell them to do, Richard, Evelyn said, her voice final. Because the alternative is bankruptcy. You will tell them that your corporate culture cost you 10% of your company. You will tell them that a flight attendant's laugh just cost your shareholders tens of millions of dollars. She walked to the door. You have 48 hours to agree to these terms in writing. My team is waiting. Get your house in order, Richard. The ground truthing is over. The real work is about to begin. She opened the door and walked out, leaving the four most powerful executives at Horizon Air sitting in stunned, terrified silence. The Sphinx had left the building. The fallout was not immediate, but it was total. It was a slow, grinding, and perfectly just karma that unfolded over the next 6 months. For Tiffany Hayes, Tiffany was, of course, terminated. The pending investigation was a formality that lasted less than a day. She was fired for cause, citing gross misconduct, violation of federal anti-discrimination laws, and actions resulting in catastrophic financial damage to the company. She left the HR office in a daze, her badge gone, her career in flames. She was furious, defiant, and in complete denial. She immediately hired a lawyer, intending to sue Horizon Air for wrongful termination. That lawsuit lasted 3 days. The moment her lawyer received the responding letter from Skadden, ARPS, the firm Evelyn Reed kept on a multi-million-dollar retainer, he dropped her as a client. The letter made it clear that not only would they fight her suit, but Reed Capital Partners and Horizon Air would countersue Tiffany personally for tortious interference with a contract, defamation, and damages, to the tune of $150 million. They had sworn affidavits from over a dozen passengers on HA-212, including Samuel Chen. They had her entire disciplinary history, which was peppered with minor complaints of rudeness to economy passengers. Tiffany was radioactive. She was blacklisted. In the tight-knit aviation community, the story of the flight attendant who cost her airline 10% of its equity spread like wildfire. No other major carrier would touch her. Even the budget airlines wouldn't return her calls. She lost her condo in Santa Monica. Her car was repossessed. The glamorous life she had built, funded by flight benefits and a sense of unearned superiority, crumbled to dust. 9 months after that flight, Tiffany Hayes was working a 4 a.m. shift. She was wearing a paper hat and a polyester apron. She was serving burnt coffee and stale bagels at the Daily Grind, a small kiosk in the old part of Terminal 3 at LAX, the one no one went to anymore. One morning, a woman in a crisp New Horizon Air pilot's uniform stopped at the counter. Tiffany, her eyes red from lack of sleep, looked up and her heart stopped. It was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, however, was not a pilot. The uniform was new. It was a custom-designed dark blue management suit. On her lapel was a new pin. Sarah Jenkins, Vice President, In-Flight Experience and Training. Sarah looked at Tiffany. There was no triumph in her eyes. No, I told you so. There was just a profound, weary sadness. She had seen the rot up close, and this was its pathetic end. "A large black coffee, please," Sarah said, her voice even. Tiffany, her hands shaking so hard she could barely work the machine, poured the coffee. That'll be $4.50, she mumbled, unable to make eye contact. Sarah Jenkins put a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change, Tiffany," she said, not unkindly. "I truly hope you find your way." Sarah picked up her coffee and walked away, her shoes clicking decisively on the tile floor, on her way to a meeting about the new fleet of A321neos that Evelyn's funding had just secured. Tiffany Hayes watched her go, and then, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee, she finally broke down and wept. For Richard Strickland. Strickland survived, but only just. He agreed to all of Evelyn's terms. He paid $3.8 million out of his own pocket for the independent audit, a painful, humiliating process that exposed every dirty secret of his company's culture. The board, furious at the 10% equity dilution, clawed back his entire bonus for the year and froze his salary. He was no longer the hotshot CEO featured in travel magazines. He was the man who had to go, hat in hand, to Evelyn Reed's office once a month to personally deliver the progress reports on the new anti-bias training. He kept his job, but he lost his power. He was now in effect an employee of the woman his airline had humiliated. For Sarah Jenkins, Evelyn Reed was true to her word. Sarah was promoted within a week. She was terrified at first, but Evelyn personally mentored her. "You don't need an MBA to know what's right, Sarah," Evelyn told her over lunch. "You have 25 years of field data. You have empathy. That's more than any of those executives have. Now go fix it." And she did. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a massive budget and the full backing of the company's new, most powerful investor, tore the old training manual to shreds. The Sarah Jenkins Initiative became the new company Bible. It focused on one principle. Dignity in 34E is the same as dignity in 1A. She became a star. She was profiled in Aviation Weekly as a pioneer of the new, equitable service model. She was respected, and for the first time in her career, she was heard. For Samuel Chen, the student from UCLA did in fact call the number on the card. He was given a summer internship in Reed Capital's Los Angeles office. He was brilliant. Evelyn, seeing his sharp mind and, more importantly, his strong moral compass, fast-tracked him. The story ended with him graduating and accepting a full-time, high-paying analyst position with her firm. His life changed forever because he dared to speak up for a stranger on a plane. 1 year later, the transformation was not just visible, it was visceral. Horizon Air, once a punchline in aviation forums, was now the industry's comeback kid. The press, with its love for simple narratives, had dubbed it the Phoenix Airway. The old faded branding was gone, replaced by a sleek, deep indigo and silver livery. The new motto, emblazoned on the tail fin and on every new uniform, was simple: dignity at every altitude. Dr. Evelyn Reed sat in the newly constructed Horizon Air flagship lounge at LAX. It was unrecognizable. Gone was the stained carpet and the stale air. This was a space of light, glass, and quiet efficiency. Walnut partitions created private work areas. A full-service bar was staffed by mixologists, and the buffet featured fresh, locally sourced food. It was, in every respect, a world-class facility. Evelyn, however, wasn't looking at the amenities. She was watching the staff. She saw a lounge manager approach a family with a crying baby, not with annoyance but with a smile, offering to warm a bottle and bringing the stressed mother a complimentary glass of champagne. She saw a gate agent patiently explaining a connection to an elderly passenger, even pulling up a map of the Denver airport on a tablet. This was the ground truth she was looking for. A shadow fell over her table. She looked up. It was Richard Strickland. He looked 10 years older, the stress of the past 12 months having etched new lines around his eyes. But his slick, panicked energy was gone. He looked humbled, tired, and focused. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't sit, but stood respectfully. "I just received the final quarterly report from the auditors you appointed. I wanted to be the first to tell you." He paused, taking a breath. "We passed. A 94% compliance score on all new protocols. A 97% positive rating on passenger-facing interactions. We met every benchmark you set." Evelyn sipped her water. She studied him for a long moment. "That's a start, Richard. And employee retention? Specifically for flight crew hired under the Jenkins Initiative?" Richard almost smiled. He'd been ready for that question. "Up 40%. Our attrition rate is the lowest in the industry." "Sarah, God, Evelyn, that woman is a miracle. She's not just a VP, she's the soul of this company. She's in D.C. this week, actually, speaking at a federal transportation symposium on service culture." He finally allowed himself a glimmer of pride. It's a different airline, Evelyn. You didn't just invest in us, you rebuilt us. Evelyn slowly folded the Wall Street Journal she'd been reading and placed it in her leather satchel. The same one. Good, she said simply. Relief washed over Strickland's face. Your flight to London is boarding at gate 112. Of course, I've taken the liberty of placing you in 1A. It's our new Sky Suite. Fully private, lie-flat bed. It's the flagship of the new fleet. I'd be honored if you'd be our guest. Please, let me escort you for pre-boarding. Evelyn stood, smoothing her simple black trousers and silk blouse. She picked up her satchel. Then she pulled her paper boarding pass from her pocket and laid it on the table. Thank you, Richard. That's very generous. But I'm in 34E. Strickland stared at the boarding pass as if it were a snake. Read E seat 34E, Group 5. He was genuinely, utterly baffled. I don't understand. This is a mistake. It's a middle seat in the back of the plane. Ben! He started to call for his assistant. Ben, get on the phone with the gate. It's not a mistake, Richard. Evelyn's voice was calm, cutting through his rising panic. But why? He whispered, truly lost. After all this, you own 10% of the company. You sit on the board. You saved us. You don't ever have to fly and coach again. Evelyn zipped her satchel. She looked at him and her expression was not unkind. You're confusing ownership with leadership, Richard. Your reports are good. Your audit is clean. Sarah's work is, by all accounts, extraordinary. She shouldered her bag. But a report is just paper. A lounge is just a room. The real airline, the real test isn't here. It's not in 1A. The real test is in 34E. It's what happens to a passenger in Group 5 when no one is watching. Your company almost imploded because your staff believed a person's dignity was tied to their seat number. She started walking toward the lounge exit. The work is never done. I'm not an investor today. I'm a customer. I need to see if the changes are just a policy or if they're finally the culture. I need to see if the changes stuck. Strickland stood frozen for a moment, watching her go. Then he scrambled after her, following at a discreet distance. He watched her walk past the opulent entrance to the first-class boarding lane. He watched her walk to the very end of the snaking Group 5 line, taking her place behind a large family with 3 noisy, excited children and a group of college students. She was just another passenger, anonymous, waiting. Strickland's heart was in his throat. His entire career, the fate of 5,000 employees, all felt like it was balanced on this one single interaction. Finally, Group 5 was called. Evelyn shuffled forward with the crowd. She reached the podium where a new, bright-eyed young gate agent named Alex was scanning passes. Good afternoon, she said, handing him her pass. Good afternoon, Alex replied, scanning it. Beep. He looked at the pass, then at her. He didn't recognize her name. She was just E. Reed. He smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. Welcome to Horizon Air, Ms. Reed. You're in 34E today. He tapped a few keys. Just wanted to let you know, that's an exit row, so you'll have plenty of extra leg room on this long flight. However, it does mean you'll have to store all your belongings in the overhead bin. I'm aware, Evelyn said. Thank you. Great. The agent handed her the pass. It's a long walk down the jet bridge. Can I get you a bottle of water to take with you? We're offering it to all our passengers on transatlantic flights today. Evelyn Reed paused. She looked at the young man, who was already turning to the next passenger with the same professional, warm smile. He hadn't fawned over her. He hadn't dismissed her. He had been polite, professional, and proactive. He had treated her with dignity. From the lounge entrance, Richard Strickland watched. He saw Evelyn pause. He saw her turn her head, just slightly, and look back at him. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. And then, for the first time since he'd met her, Dr. Evelyn Reed smiled, a real, warm, genuine smile. Thank you, Alex, she said to the agent. I'd like that very much. She took the water, turned, and walked down the jet bridge, blending into the crowd, just another passenger on her way to London. Richard Strickland leaned against a wall, his legs weak. He finally let out the breath he'd been holding for an entire year. The phoenix, he thought, had truly, finally taken flight. And that's how one woman's dignity and one flight attendant's prejudice changed an entire airline. This story is a powerful reminder that you never ever know who you're talking to. But more than that, it shows that your worth isn't determined by the seat you're sitting in, the clothes you're wearing, or the color of your skin. Real power is about integrity and real karma. Well, real karma always finds its address, even at 30,000 feet. What did you think of Tiffany's ultimate fate? Was it too harsh, or was it exactly the justice she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, and if you believe that kindness and respect should be the standard, not the exception, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true life stories of drama, justice, and karma. Thank you for listening.